too many data centers are stuck in this mindset of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think that attitude is holding back the efficiency and sustainability and profitability that could be very possible. So I kind of label this as technical debt in data centers. And I believe that it's just a real phenomenon. Failing to innovate because means that they're falling behind in energy efficiencies, electronic utilization efficiencies, people efficiencies. So embracing innovation early, I think, is not a risk. It's a smart business move that keeps you ahead of the curve. So basically, I would say they need to step outside of their comfort zone and start to think about, okay, what other ways can we fix this problem? It's not broken, but what other ways can we innovate and disrupt ourselves? Hi, my name is Bhupinder Bhullar. I'm from SwissVault, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Welcome, Data Center friends. It's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. And I'm thrilled to be welcoming with me today a very special guest. I'm welcoming Bhupinder Bhullar from SwissVault in Switzerland. Bhupinder is the CEO of SwissVault. I'm thrilled to have you with me today joining. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joshua. It's wonderful to be here and also great to connect with you.
Yeah, likewise. And you're working on a really, really interesting startup at the intersection of sustainability and digital infrastructure and storage. But I'm super curious about how you ended up at this place in your career. Was it something you've been thinking about for a while? Have you always had an interest in digital infrastructure going back to formative years, like when you're in high school or university? Or did things just happen along the way that set you along this path?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because it's an interesting journey for myself as well. Maybe inspires some of your audience members too. So basically, I was trained in DNA genome sequencing. I was actually working on models to understand the molecular basis of disease, in particular cancer. And I was trained in a group that was at the same group that did the human genome sequencing project, which, as many people know, was a 10 to 20-year project costing $2-3 billion and requiring the efforts of many people around the world. But the one thing that many people don't realize is that DNA sequencing, when you sequence someone's genome, you're basically creating a data file that's a raw data file. With the current technologies, it's about a terabyte of raw data. Back then, about 2010, it was not appreciated that, this is a lot of data. It's actually, but now it's not as much as appreciated today because we're now into terabytes of disks. But back in the day, it was a lot of data. We had to double the data storage capacity at the company I was working at just for the work that we were doing in sequencing. And the issue was that I was telling people to share their genome data, share it so that we can understand what's causing lung cancer, for instance. But first of all, the volume data is difficult to manage, so you really can't share this data openly. That was not my major concern generally at the time. But what really sort of supercharged my desire to get into the data storage was the data privacy, because the genome really represents something that's your most private data on the planet. Yeah. Forget about social media data, because that belongs to you, yes, and tells a lot about you, but your genome tells things about you, like what diseases you're going to get, what quirks you might have in particular. But this data doesn't belong just to you; it belongs also to your children and to your great grandchildren. So it became a kind of a light bulb moment when I realized, wait a minute, if I have a marker for a disease and I'm denied life insurance because my data is out there and it's publicly available, then so will the future generations before they even had a chance to participate. So it was like this data, the way we manage data in society, is actually fundamental to human liberty and freedom. And that kind of gave me that sort of my purpose, and I became very sharply focused. I need to do this project where I can help people store that data in a more with privacy, basically, for their lifetime. And so I started to work with my partners and my colleagues to try to think about a solution. And one of my roommates, in fact, Doug Fortune, CTO now, was actually the one who was helping us to spearhead this novel way of thinking about how we can manage data for a long period of time, and trying to solve the problems that were coming up in hospitals, which was the major site that we were focused on, because hospitals don't have a lot of electrical power, a lot of space, a lot of people to work with them to help them solve the problems. So we started looking at how to reduce that energy, reduce the space, reduce the complexity to manage data. And we said 100 years. We want to be able to manage the data for 100 years, a lifetime of one individual. And so that's what we set up out doing. And then we developed technology. We actually did develop. We have developed software and hardware that meets the criteria that I just discussed. So I'm quite proud of the team.
So the initiative is largely about energy conservation and sustainability with storing the data efficiently and having a massive shelf life for carrying through 100 years, which if someone hasn't given that much thought, I remember years ago, people were talking about how CDs, you'd burn a CD or burn a DVD and the shelf life on that was just a few years, right? So
it's true, you're right. So basically, we don't think about that way. So basically, we have to enable solutions that are already being used and use them more efficiently. So we're saying, okay, there's tape drives, there's JBODs, and there's converged servers, and each one of them trying to do a job in data storage. Tape drives are desired because there's a bulk of data and it's at very low energy. Of course, once you write it, it's there. It doesn't require any more energy and much more cost efficient technically. But then there's JBODs, which allow you to have store a lot of data, and that data is accessible, unlike tape drives. The data is accessible and available for the customer, the end user, to get right away. But it doesn't have any compute either. And then there's a converged storage, which uses compute and then uses a lot of energy. And there's maybe not as much data volume that you can store in the converged server. So our design now, which we started to think outside the box, outside the rack, allows us to do all these three jobs: store lots of data with low energy, data is always available, and there's compute on board as well. So we're using conventional disks. And what we do is, when we say 100-year storage, we know that things will fail. We know disks will fail. We know servers will fail. But how do we manage that so that you have this high resiliency? So even though disks and servers are failing, you still have access to your data. And that's because our software uses erasure coding, something that we have built with our own sort of criteria. And that gives us this very high flexibility to spread data across numbers of disks and servers and mitigate against failure. And that reduces the energy consumption for the volume. Because it's a simple math. You reduce the volume of data by 50%. That means you're reducing the energy by 50%. That means you're reducing the storage media that you're using by 50%. And so it's the mantra is reduce, 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 and you get to a sustainability equation.
What's super interesting about that also is when I talk with a lot of people that focus just on sustainability, they talk about how decarbonization is a misnomer and doesn't tell the whole story and doesn't solve the whole problem, because you still have the raw materials that are being manufactured. And like you explained exactly that, is that you're cutting the need for half as many SSDs. You're cutting, yeah. So it's the whole supply chain.
Yeah, exactly. And then one way was that when we realized that the reason why many data centers go through this refresh cycle every 3 to 5 years is because this propensity to lose your data because systems start to fail. So if you could remove this out of the equation, which is loss of data loss, then you can run your systems till they fail, basically, because you're not worrying about, oh, I'm going to start to lose systems, lose my disks or lose servers, and then I'm going to start to lose my data as well. And I'm not going to be able to keep up at a certain point. After 3 to 5 years, the failure rates can accelerate, or maybe there's some other issues there that's going to come up. But basically what we're saying is, once you remove that equation, you can run your servers up to 10 years just to be efficient in storage. So that means that you can now get better capital expenses because you're using your equipment better, and you're reducing electronic waste as well.
Seems very timely as well too, because if you look at on the data center side, the need for AI and high performance compute is forcing a lot of rethinking on facilities and a lot of facilities being decommissioned. So at the same time that infrastructure executives are receptive to thinking about the facilities, are probably equally receptive to thinking about challenging some of their assumptions on the IT side, and especially in storage. It's an interesting analogy too, even on the desktop side. Used to the desktop cycles for decades were driven by Windows. Windows has been relatively stable for a while. So you see people that have been stretching out laptops and desktops much longer age, and then next year there'll be a cycle with that. So it's interesting that the current events and the refresh cycle around upgrading facilities to handle the densities, the power densities that are needed to power GPUs, probably will also set people in the right frame of mind to be thinking about what else that they can do to be way more efficient.
Yeah, that's what I hope so as well. Exactly. And so I'll give you an example of that, is that, typically you need GPUs to run machine learning or AI instantiate inference. And the way we've been thinking about it is, how do we do it at the edge? Because you would have maybe your own applications. There's a very good project that's out there. I won't name the name because we're still in discussions with the team. But the idea is, if you can have AI at the edge, where let's say you have your own proprietary data that you want to be able to use, so you can run it at the edge. But how do you get it to be efficient? So right now you can't use you don't want to use 300-watt GPUs. So what we learned is that with our AI, our vault file solution, which does parallel processing, parallel read and write speeds, we can accelerate the AI at the edge inference much faster and using only like 10 or 15-watt GPUs or NPUs. So it's about also enabling efficiency at the edge. And data and AI, as you know, is really a race for more data and stuff. So you need a lot of data to support the AI models. And so we're trying to get the AI efficiency by enabling more efficient data storage at the edge as well.
And you see this general trend towards the edge because widely known that AI not only is latency intensive, but smart cities, autonomous vehicles, 5G are all super latency distance sensitive. And then you also have this movement going on throughout a lot of parts of Europe with heat reuse and district heating, decentralized data centers around that. So there's a lot of interesting things coming together at the same time that could be pretty useful, insightful, adjacent conversations.
Right. Agreed. Yeah.
So, Bhupinder, you're at this place in your career, you've been doing this a while, you have a strong knowledge of the data center ecosystem. From time to time, especially in like a university setting, but even when you just think about sons and daughters, nieces, nephews of coworkers, friends, family members, you must get people approaching you that are thinking about careers that are high school, university, and they're curious. They've heard a lot about data centers, certainly a lot more in the last year or two. So much more in the news. They're not particularly interested in technical careers. They've heard about are there client-facing opportunities? What advice would you give to someone that maybe like in their late teens, early 20s, that's thinking about a career doing something related to data centers?
So basically a tip for those who are new to working in this, right? So
yeah, or just contemplating like this versus going to med school, going into engineering, going into like, they've heard that there's a lot of job growth coming in data centers, and they're curious about what the career paths might look like and what the opportunities might look like. What guidance would you give to someone in that situation?
Well, I think you hit the point on the nail on the head, is that data is accelerating. So innovating it with data is always going to be a hot demand. And I believe that the new people can be faster at embracing innovation. So I think that that's what will be their basically their superpower in a sense, and especially in changing the way we manage data and maybe accelerate how this industry will actually grow. The data center industry is evolving faster than ever. It's easy to get lost in it, but I would say that if anybody wants to enter the data center industry, because there's a massive career opportunity here, but those who can manage data, because it still hasn't penetrated throughout the developing world as well. The emerging markets are still looking for this talent pool that's going to help them own their own data, for instance. And so I believe there's going to be a lot of careers in the data center industry themselves. I'm not going to say compare it to going to med school or not. It's up to different flavors. But those who are really tech savvy and might find that there's a very strong, stable career in the data center industry, So to them, I would say focus on solutions that have really impact, right? Both operationally and environmentally. For example, if you're looking at the way data is managed now, we're using these traditional server racks, which have designs from the 1800s. And when Morse code was first introduced, they had to develop these rack systems. And our CTO thought, well, this rack system is limiting in its ability to scale up because you have this massive 800 or 1,000 pound rack. So we thought, why don't we do something that's modular, so modular hardware, and basically we end up cutting the energy use, we cut in the electronic waste because the way these modules are designed, they're much fewer components, much lower weight, and you can just add them on and scale up. So the other point I would say to those who are entering the industry, especially data center industry, there's a lot that needs to be done about sustainability. So you can already empower these centers by thinking about how to reduce, cut the carbon footprints of data center. It will set these young people apart and then allow them to really innovate.
So interesting too, when you're talking about how long the racks have been around. It was an interesting conversation I just saw a couple of days ago on LinkedIn. Someone was talking about how racks at some point used to be beige, and then they all turned to darker colors. And are the darker colors making the changing the reflectivity of the light that's in the data centers and causing more energy drain? And should we go back to the age where, and then someone that from a company that makes racks says, no, you don't realize that if the racks were all still beige, they discolor, they look very unsightly, they have a shorter shelf life. And so really interesting conversations coming about just by the coating, the paint that goes on the racks that are sitting in the data centers and how it can potentially influence energy use.
So one of the thoughts I had along that line is that we were saying, well, these racks, they were 2.2 meters tall. They're really tall, and you can't see over them. You can't see across the data center because these racks are so tall. And so it gives you kind of I don't know, it's just a different kind of feeling if you would be able to see across. So we said, let's design our racks, our innovative racks, to be only chest high, so you can see across the data center. Would that give a different kind of a feeling as well? And can we store more data in that space? And the answer is yes. With our innovative designs, we could still store more data in that smaller space, and give you that visibility across the data center. Something else that I'm really interested in exploring.
So it sounds like for young people exploring these kinds of careers, and interest in sustainability and curiosity around data would serve them really well. And picking out courses, majors, what to learn about, what kind of internships to seek out to set them on this path.
Yeah, I believe there's be a lot of opportunities for internships, for sure.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
What about someone that's more mid-career? Maybe it's someone that you work with at a previous company 10, 15 years ago. You used to be pretty close to them. You bump into them at a conference and they want to sit down and have breakfast or lunch. And they're curious with you, curious to get your thoughts on what they should do to get their career a little bit back. You sense a little bit of burnout. You sense they're a little stressed out. They're looking for a reset. They want to do something related to digital infrastructure. What guidance, thoughts would you have to offer a friend that you haven't seen in a while that's coming to you for advice?
Someone who's been in the data center industry for a while, I guess you can say.
Yeah. They feel like they've hit a brick wall with progression. They're trying to figure out what moves, what opportunities they should look at next. They've historically been in a client-facing role. Maybe something related to product or sales, engineering, solutions, marketing, channel partnerships, something along those lines.
So these individuals also have a superpower, and that is that they have experienced the inefficiencies in the data center, right? So I would say to them, you need to leverage your experience build a solution that you would love to use. For instance, I always use the example of Doug, who's our CTO, Doug Fortune. He worked in the petroleum data center industry for almost 30 years. And he had lots of headaches that he said he wanted to start to design solutions that he wanted to use, basically, to fix the problems that he had. So I think the industry needs people who know these kind of ropes, but they're also willing to rethink the old ways of doing things. And so I would say to them is that if I was sitting down with them having coffee, is that don't be afraid to challenge the status quo and push for sustainable, future-proof solutions that you would love to use, that you would have designed yourself, for instance. Yeah, that's kind of what I would say to them.
And it's a really interesting choice as well with having someone like Doug on your team, because it gives you superpowers to basically have your core buyer persona be on your founding team with having direct insights, and then just a matter of getting validation from his former peers in similar kinds of companies to make sure what you're building aligns with but yeah, a lot of companies VCs end up going to go get an entrepreneur in residence or someone like that to match up with that later as an afterthought. But yeah, it's terrific when you have someone like that who's working on roadmap issues and product market fit issues and everything like that, who comes from exactly the job role that you're intending for the primary audience.
Yeah.
When you look at what's going on in the industry on a global basis, beyond Switzerland, beyond even Europe, what do you think is the biggest challenge or biggest mistake that most people are overlooking that you'd wish they'd approach a little bit differently?
So the biggest mistake, well, basically it's obvious from my side. It's basically sticking to outdated infrastructure just because it's safe for them to do so. So too many data centers, and I have so many presentations in Europe, also in North America. Too many data centers are stuck in this mindset of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think that attitude is holding back the efficiency and sustainability and profitability that could be very possible. So I kind of label this as technical debt in data centers. And I believe that it's just a real phenomenon. Failing to innovate because means that they're falling behind in energy efficiencies, electronic utilization efficiencies, people efficiencies. So embracing innovation early, I think, is not a risk. It's a smart business move that keeps you ahead of the curve. So basically, I would say they need to step outside of their comfort zone and start to think about, okay, what other ways can we fix this problem? It's not broken, but what other ways can we innovate and disrupt ourselves?
Yeah, it's a super interesting perspective, because for anyone that's a lifelong IT professional, whether they've been on a software development team or just worked adjacent to, they've certainly heard the term technical debt thrown around over the years when it comes to going back to the days of even client server before SaaS and cloud infrastructure. But yeah, to think about it in terms of infrastructure is definitely, and the risk aversion also. So you're saying is the risk of standing still is actually hurting them a lot more than they realize with all that.
Exactly. Yeah.
You wonder too, like the companies that have an innovation leader versus don't have an innovation leader.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, you see the changes happening right now. I mean, one of the things that I always quote is from CERN. Basically, they say, where we want to go, we just can't simply scale the solutions that we have. It's not going to be possible. So we need to think in different ways.
Yeah, about so many parts, even just energy consumption and the impact on the planet and running out of power capacity is a really interesting difference in mindset that I see when I talk with people on the two sides of the pond. Throughout Europe, most of the conversations inevitably have a sustainability theme. When I talk to people in similar roles in the US, it's not so much sustainability as that we're running out of power. How do we get more power? But it's really hard to see the implications of how the regulatory policies in EU around energy and sustainability aren't like months away from also impacting companies in the US because of how globally connected everything is with supply chains and operators that have facilities on both sides of the pond. But yeah, going to be interesting things to see play out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, yeah.
The policy decisions and everything.
I think I heard in Virginia, which is the largest concentration of data centers in the U.S.
Yeah.
I mean, you can build the building, but you have to wait 7 years before you get electrical power.
Yeah, it's very real. That's why I see more people talking about there. Going back even 5-10 years ago, there was a recognition that beyond the 5 or 6 really big markets, there was a tier 2. But yeah, there's really strong interest now in places like Portland, Oregon, and Atlanta, Georgia, and for exactly that reason. The interesting part is when I talk with people that are in the Nordics, especially, they would probably favor go to Minneapolis, go to the northern New England, go anywhere where you have year-round relatively modest temperatures that would help with with being able to take advantage of free cooling and things like that. But yeah, it seems to be a different approach to how all of this is being addressed. And then there's also differences in grid capacity.
Is that right?
You take the case like Northern Virginia, where it like totally filled up, and then there's other areas too where they want to grow faster, but then there's grid limitations of like, okay, what happens when EV adoption hits 50% at the same time? Yep. All these high density data centers are coming online. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of interesting debates and trade-offs that need to be worked through in the next couple of years with development.
Agreed.
When you look into your crystal ball and you think about what you work on most days, most weeks, most months with growing a company like Swiss Vault, how do you envision that your daily routines are going to change in leading a company like that 2, 3, 4 years out from now?
Well, so that's a very good question, because I'm planning and we're planning for the future. We are always designing for the future. So in the future, I believe that just like the issues that we talked about, we're hitting the wall in energy. We're hitting the wall in terms of building more data centers and construction of data centers. So what I think is going to be the 3 themes is going to be, one is about sustainability. The second is going to be about modularity. So you can easily scale up and scale down. That's software-based modularity, software-imposed modularity, and hardware-imposed modularity. But more importantly, also about the edge. The third innovation is about the edge. And so I think the companies will be demanding more data, but with less energy. And they'll expect the vendors to bring an environmentally conscious, flexible system to the table, basically. So it won't be just about selling equipment. It's going to be offering a complete ecosystem that that it's going to be about the software that manages that data with less effort on the part of people. So automatically does things like data migration, data scale up, fixing bit rot, fixing corrupted files. And of course, the hardware, which is easy to manage. You don't need an expert to be able to go and change a disk run. So I think it's going to be, this is what we're planning for, which is what we're preparing for, and the way we're designing our solutions.
When you think about where you're moving in those 3 areas and the kinds of data center professionals that you spend the most time with, do you think there's a significant amount of education, rethinking, getting people to be open to these possibilities, or do you think it's going to be a natural byproduct of pressures that they're already facing around sustainability?
I think it's the last one. It's basically the pressures that they're currently facing, limitation not only in the energy part we just talked about, but also talent pool. And right now, I think people have to run into a data center at 2 o'clock in the morning to fix the disk, right? Because the data needs to be rebuilt on it. Otherwise, there's a propensity to be losing that data. So what we designed, as I said, because of what we think is that there's just not enough talented people or a talented pool to be able to do that. It's also a tax on the organization in terms of costs. And so if we could, the way to improve it is you can tolerate failures. If a disk fails or server failures, you can leave that broken for a week, a month, a year, it doesn't matter. I'll give you an example. I mean, the way we designed it, I said to the team, this is what I said. I said, imagine you have a data center in space and it's floating above the Earth and you get a disk failure. Can you go and send a person up there and fix that disk? No, you can't. You have to tolerate the failure. Can you send someone up there to replace that server? No, you can't. Maybe you can send a new server up there, and that becomes part of that sort of the cluster, and that's how you continue to manage a long-term resilient data operation. And so we kind of designed it for the extreme edge, thinking about this problem, like just kind of like hypothetically. And so that's how I think the future was like.
Elon Musk will bring a crew up there to rescue them in about 6 to 9 months, but that's a long time. Or I think about too, the other example back on Earth is the people the scientists that go down to Antarctica for 6 months at a time, and it's just not safe until the summer comes around to be able to land a plane to get supplies in and out of there. So I guess when it comes to IT, whatever they have is what they have.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's got to be built with a certain amount of fault tolerance. When you look at what you do on a fairly regular basis, have you found much impact for AI in your daily routines? Are there any like favorite tools or apps that you use that just wouldn't have been conceivable to help you with growing a company like SwissVault a couple of years ago?
Well, actually, AI gave us the impetus to really think about how we designed our solution. Because back in the day when I started pitching this idea and the solution, I said, the race for AI, and I remember my first slides, I said the race for AI is really a race for more data. It was actually from the Economist. It was the headline of the front page of the Economist back in that time. So I said the race for AI is a race for more data. And so if we create a massive demand for data store, and that's going to create a massive demand for data storage, and hence that's why we're building our systems. And so every AI model, every algorithm needs enormous amounts of data, and storing that data efficiently has become one of the biggest challenges in the industry. The old company I work with is a big pharma company. They've pivoted and they said, we're not a drug discovery company, we're a data company.
Yeah.
So, and they built a massive data lake for 100 petabytes or more of just all their real proprietary data, which gives them the unique advantage in the industry because they have collected a unique set of data to build more innovative products, right? So the demand for AI has sharpened our approach to delivering a scalable, energy efficient, and long-term data storage solution. So that's one thing. And I mentioned to you earlier on is how we built the software to handle AI at the edge, right? So be able to say, okay, if you can feed your processors faster, you can get faster time to results as well. And that's how our software works, basically parallelization. So our bet is that in the AI era, the companies that provide the smart, sustainable data solutions will also lead the way, right?
Yeah, and it's at the risk of going too much Elon Musk. It reminds me too, like it was very obvious that Tesla was going to be a data-centric company as opposed to perceived as just an auto manufacturer. But all the mainstream auto manufacturers have warmed up to that idea as ready. You see a lot of manufacturers moving in that direction, even like John Deere, the tractor equipment. They all have been thinking about IoT for a long time. It's changing business models. It's getting them to think about the OpEx, CapEx argument that's been going on in IT for 20 years already. So yeah, for sure it changes the lens at how you look at so many normal investments that companies would make. And what's super interesting to me as well, when you mentioned seeing this originally on The Economist, is when I look at patterns among different founders and different consultants in digital infrastructure that work specifically around sustainability, there is an awful lot of people that can trace their routes to either having an undergraduate degree in economics or working as an economist or working as an analyst or something like that. And I don't see that necessarily in other parts of the data center ecosystem. It's not as prevalent in just IT jobs or cybersecurity or in construction or real estate, but I am seeing a lot of it in sustainability, people using that as the lens for how they look at the world.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about what it takes to keep your skill sharp, do you have any favorite resources, any YouTubers, any podcasters, any blogs, newsletters, things like that you read on a regular basis that you think would be especially helpful to either introduce to our podcast audience or would be really interesting to have on this podcast as a guest in the future?
Okay, guests in the future. Well, sometimes the history teaches us great lessons. And on my team, I have an individual who was at the beginning of the revolution when America Online was coming online. Do you remember back in the day? And so basically, there was a race to get these edge nodes. There's that word again, edge, and they were trying to get these dial-up nodes in and set up all along the East Coast, so the individuals could connect to their modems, et cetera, right? And so I think you should interview the pioneer who was in that infrastructure development. Yeah, and so I can give you the name if you like, or I can tell you offline. And one of the fantastic things about this story was how to find space in any building. Could be a hotel room, basically. The hotel room to basically they would take over the hotel room and leverage the air conditioning in the room to install an edge node. It was a very fascinating story because there's a real race to get this in as fast as possible to connect as many people as possible. And I kind of think that that's going to come around again, because now with the edge, where you can, the way we're thinking about it is that every home could have a data center. Basically, you get this your own private data center, and imagine what that could enable people to do. I mean, you can have your very private video conferencing, your own emails for your lifetime. Right now, I look back at my digital career, and a lot of my emails have been left at universities, university data servers, because you had your first account there, and then they shut it down when you left the university. And all the stuff that we created, that digital history is gone, basically. And I always wonder now with the AI that's available, how you could connect it and maybe put together the thread of your life. You can always connect the dots looking backwards, as Steve Jobs used to say, but not necessarily looking forward, right? So it would be great to have that data. And I always think, but the future, our children may have that possibility now. So the individual I'm thinking about is the one who connected America and to get them online with building these edge dial-up nodes. It might be something very fascinating. It's a fascinating story, so it might be someone you might want to interview.
Yeah, it's super interesting too, is at the time that AOL was just getting started, one of the jobs that I had I worked for IBM for 2.5 years promoting higher ed PCs in the early days, and I got to meet someone from a startup called Prodigy at the time that was a joint venture between IBM and Sears that was largely in the same space as AOL and CompuServe. And one of my interesting part-time jobs was going around to user groups and computer shows and everything like that, and evangelizing very early stage dial-up internet before DSL and before broadband came online in the late 90s, back when and there was buckets of minutes. They were literally limiting you to how long you could be online.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'd be super interested to hear more about what lessons can be learned from the edge deployments in the 1990s, 30 years later.
Yeah, I think what was old, I believe, is coming back again. So I'm keeping my eyes open in the sense of how we can leverage that to build a different kind of web, basically, where it's be highly distributed, of course, but more that you can have your own basically server at home. But remember, trying to solve the problem. I mean, it's a multi-layered problem. I won't get into too much in it right now, but basically, when you have a server at home, they always say, well, what if I lose my server? Do I lose all my data? But we've solved that problem by distributing the data across multiple servers that you may have with your friends, et cetera. So these are early days, but we're thinking about the problem, but we believe we have a solution that might enable this. And slowly, we'll get to a different kind of experience.
I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was quite a few hobbyists that were bringing server class systems that were being decommissioned from their office into home to just experiment with them. But I've seen a resurgent movement of that in the last couple of years, where on the operator side, I talked to someone a couple months ago who's a sales leader from a big operator, and he was describing his home setup. And he was encouraging all the people that were on his team to do the same thing. And I talked to another operator, same kind of mindset. The sales executives that are surviving in largely commoditized co-location kind of businesses have needed to level up to the point that they have the same kind of skill set as someone who'd be considered like a fractional CTO for small and medium-sized businesses. That's the level of knowledge that they've needed to pick up, and additional certifications and everything like this to be able to get a good foot in the door and have productive conversations with prospects and clients. So yeah, it's super interesting to see all of this come full circle on those two or three trends.
Yeah, excellent.
Bhupinder, if someone wants to follow what you're working on, reach out, get in touch, what's the best way to reach out to you? Is LinkedIn a good place?
LinkedIn is fantastic also, but we have a website, and the website sort of updates people on what we're kind of building. Also, we'd love people to come and try it, demo our technology. The hardware and software, it's a little bit harder to do that, but the software, we can give you access to our servers. You can try it. There's a bit of part of my campaign now is not to sell people, but to talk to them about how to do things differently, to educate. Yeah. And then they come to their own conclusions. Yeah, this is simpler, or yeah, I can deploy this. It's not that difficult, and etc. So basically, come to our website. It's swissvault.global, all one word, SwissVault, and there's a demo. Request a demo link on there, or you can actually write to me an email. There's a email on the website where you can click on and talk and just get connected with us as well.
Cool. I'll make sure to include both those captioned into the video, and we'll link up to that in the blog version and the show notes that go along with this podcast episode. And what you're experiencing with the need to educate people before they get to a sales process is super relevant to what's going on in B2B tech across the board, where there's just so many more people doing tons of research before they actually want to have a conversation. So being able to get in early and being the one that's teaching them and asking them the tough questions, being in a position to help frame the criteria that they use to evaluate your whole category is tremendously empowering. The companies that aren't embracing that, it's going to be a little rough road ahead. But yeah, there's 10 years ago, it was largely believed that about half of a journey was over before sales vendor contact. Now it's about 80-90% of the journey is over. It's a very, very different ball game with baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z and millennials in the mix as decision makers, 10 more years of digital transformation, millions of people working from home for a few years in the early part of the 2020s. So yeah, for sure what you're doing is spot on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me on the podcast today. I've been speaking with Bhupinder Bhullar, CEO of SwissVault, based in Switzerland. Thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Joshua, it's a pleasure. Thank you as well for including me.
You're very welcome.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.